All right, so the instructions are on the board. Please follow those. And once you're ready, we will continue with the lesson. Alrighty, I will take these. Thank you. Now, previously we were discussing how positive expectations in a classroom are a really great foundation point for managing your class. Now, I want you to imagine for me, it's your first day of teaching. You've made lots of great welcome boards. Your classroom's very positive, and you've planned a lot of icebreakers with your students, trying to make like that first day nice and fun, right? As the year proceeds, you notice that the behavior is really going downhill. We're going to discuss how you create that firm foundation where you can actually have fun later on in the year without having to worry about classroom behavioral management. So, I have some guided notes for you. You're welcome. All right. So, for the first question, basic rules of organization. Can anybody give me an example of what they think that might be? Yes.
Separate your school from your personal order.
Like, I don't know, I just let my brain go to somebody else while you're working.
All right. Is anybody else? Phone a friend?
Wait, hold on, it's coming back a little bit.
Okay.
Labeling.
Labeling. That is actually not exactly, but it is a part of one of these steps. Does anybody else have an idea? No?
No.
Alrighty. Well, let's start with number one, and this is going to be separating. I apologize for my handwriting. Your schoolwork from your personal. Why do you think it's important to do this?
And the fourth rule is to consolidate. As teachers, you get desk organizers.
Because your personal work doesn't apply to the students and their knowledge and what they need to do.
Yes, that's very right. You don't want to be distracted by your personal work. So, good rule of thumb, leave your outside world at the door. When you come into your classroom, that's when all your focus should be on your students. The second is going to be keeping your desktop clear. So as a teacher, you're going to be having a lot of papers, and you don't wanna be flooded
Minimize distractions so that you can
with
monitor all of your students' behavior.
papers that you don't know where they go, or that inevitable, oh, I turned in my homework, you just must have lost it. So by keeping a nice clear
You
desktop,
also want to be sure
that's
to
one of
make
the
sure
best
that you
ways
keep
to
the background areas clear.
have
Like
good
the
organization.
sharpener, the water fountain, the
Another
water-
good rule is you wanna have a space for your ingoing and outgoing papers.
So, what do you think it's best to make the desk space at the beginning of the school year? For direction. Yeah, so it's mark the end of the year with desks in rows facing the teacher.
And this ties in again with having your desktop clear, because now you know which papers are yours, which papers you need to return to the
When
student.
preparing the work area, that's another
And
important part.
last but not least,
Your students should be able to see.
consolidate. This is one of the most important things. And this is where label making can actually play a good role. By having labeled spaces where you keep things, that's going to really help in consolidation. Does anybody have any questions? No? Alrighty.
And when preparing your work area, you should make sure that you know all of the fire regulations for natural disasters and emergencies as you have the classroom ready.
Alright, now, before we even begin to arrange
What
the
would you
room,
think that you should arrange your
there
room?
are some key things that we need to establish first. We want to make sure that we know what the climate of work we want in our classroom, and you want to do that during the first week of school. The first week and the first day are one of the most important days when it comes
So
to
when
behavioral
preparing a
management.
student area, you want to make sure that you have a spot for all your students' belongings, like their books, their binders, their bags. And you also want to make sure you have the spots so that they can hold
So,
their books.
another thing is, great way to do this is you want to really stress large group organization and student procedures.
Yeah, so you always want to ensure that
So
you
your
provide
students
space
should
for people
understand
in the classroom.
after week 1 what is expected of them.
Alright, and when preparing the wall space, this is pretty important. You want to make sure that you post any procedures, classroom rules.
So tying back to my first example with having an overly decorated classroom and then behavioral management going down the drain, don't waste your time decorating. A few bare walls isn't going to hurt anybody, the students won't notice. What's most important is that you focus on that classroom management first. Also, you don't have to bother with having a learning center, a classroom library, or a resource center. Like, you don't have to have that complete by the first week. In fact, you should maybe keep those areas closed off until the students are behaviorally ready for those areas. So that gives you time to prepare those spots.
I would say that the most important thing is to
Does anybody want to try to answer the first week of school should stress large group organization and, do I see any hands?
So when preparing your bookcases, you want to
Yes.
make sure that you put them in
Student
an
procedures,
accessible
yes.
place. It's not by a door or window or right in front of your desk.
All right, wonderful. Does anybody have any questions about, before we arrange the room?
You also want to make sure that they're organized and not cluttered and messy.
No? Alrighty, so moving on to the floor space. First, you're gonna wanna know how many desks and chairs you need.
So where do you think that the place?
You don't have to worry about having your classroom set up the way you want it to for the rest of the year. You kind of wanna, again, go back to looking at the climate of the classroom and rearrange as needed. The best way to start out the school year is to have rows that are facing the teacher, because you always wanna maintain those lines of sight. So if I were standing, back here, that obstructs my line of sight from you, right? Doesn't make for good learning. Versus, if I'm standing here, I'm moving around, making eye contact, that's a better way to keep your students engaged and make sure that they're all paying attention. You also want to make sure when you're laying out your classroom that you don't have your high traffic areas blocked. So, when you have your rows, I shouldn't have to squeeze like this through them. Should be able to walk nicely, because in the event of an emergency, you don't want to have to be tripping over everybody's desks, right? It's also a good idea to have a spot where you can have a student isolated, just in case.
Where your students are.
Does anybody want to try to answer that little question on the next page?
Another really important part of having your classroom ready is to have your work ready.
I've heard too much from you.
So when
I want to hear from
preparing
somebody
the
else.
materials, you want to have a letter ready to send
Yeah.
to your students.
Oh,
with
sorry.
the materials
Is it
for
teaching?
Yes, it is. Thank you. Do we have any questions
Also,
about
make sure that
preparing
you
the floor
file and
space?
organize all of your materials,
No?
especially your
Alrighty.
assignments and your paperwork.
Now, we're going to move on to preparing the work area. Again, you should be able to see and monitor all of your students. Students should be able to see you as well as any frequently used displays.
What do you
So if
think
you're
is
writing on
most
the board a
important
lot
in
or
your
you have a class schedule, make sure that those are in good lines of sight. Class rules are an excellent thing to have in your classroom in a very visible space. You should also allow for movement. Make sure you have all the necessary materials ready and available.
Get it if you need to.
Nothing slows down the lesson more than having to dig through your desk for the worksheets that you're giving your students.
Kind of like an agenda, like,
And
yeah,
lastly,
yeah, that would be your
it's
main
really important to
materials.
have your classroom
Have
ready
everything
for
ready so that
emergencies.
you're
I know they
prepared.
happen, so make sure that you know your exit plan.
So aside from having the classroom and your work ready, it's also important to have teachers themselves ready. You want to make sure that
Right.
you can
Tori,
keep
would you
bags,
mind
your keys,
answering
any,
the
tables,
next
and
question
safe
for me?
sterilization in your classroom.
No, yes, please. Oh, C. Oh, I thought you were saying like the letter C. Yes, C/monitor.
You also want to make sure that you have any emergency.
I was very
materials ready,
confused. I was
such
like,
as
I don't
papers,
remember
first aid
putting
kit. That's
a
important.
multiple choice answer in there.
Thought you were gonna be like, I thought you said yes in Spanish.
You will always want to make sure that you're prepared both physically and
Preparing the student area, a lot more simple.
leaving your house.
What you just want to make sure you have is you have areas for student belongings. You know, have a place for their coats, their backpacks. Where do you think would be a good spot to maybe have these items put?
Alright, so when you're preparing yourself at school, you want